Welcome to my video on the 1980 movie Lion of the Desert. I'm going to start with a review that's going to have zero spoilers, and then I get to what I call the thought section, where I spoil everything about this movie and only this one. But I will verbally warn before getting into the thought section. This movie is rated R, so will this video be. And I really, really love this movie. I intend to keep this video sober. I'm not sure I'm going to make any jokes. I might refer to, the movie is not without jokes, although they don't ruin the tone or anything. And this is in part because of its frank depiction of historically accurate atrocities. And I do want to underline, sometimes I think I worry too much, but it has occurred to me that some might think that part of the reason that I try to be more sober during my videos that deal with Islam is that I am of the impression that Muslims have no sense of humor, or that, such. And I want to say, from personal experience, I know that that is simply not the case. I have experienced, a sense of humor in Muslims of, I guess, by now all ages, pretty much. And that does include at least some conservative ones. I've actually met some, back when I was a child, I met white, native-born Danish children, I'm Danish myself, who were conservative and had no sense of humor. And on the other hand, I've met, senior citizens who are conservative Muslims who have immigrated to Denmark who do have a sense of humor. Actually, I'll just very briefly note, I'll keep it brief. But a personal anecdote. I remember as a child, one of the white conservative boys bullied me, and when I, even slightly fought back, and we're talking verbally, not physically, he threatened to tell my mother, which is your friendly reminder that many bullies, perhaps not all, but many, are cowards who can dish it out but can't take it. And I think that is right. So there's going to be more preamble. I'm trying to think of if that, I think that covers that part of it. So before I continue, this is the part where I, as a far leftist, are called upon to acknowledge, no, Islam is not perfect. No system is. It is quite silly to claim that the fact that, some of the, obviously, there are regimes there are countries run by conservative Muslims where life is very hard and they sometimes treat their citizens poorly. It is silly to use that as justification for invasion or any other military action that is not explicitly, for one thing, necessary. Like military action, like all violence, should only ever be our last resort. And this, once again, is something that I've noted a number of Muslims understand and a number of white native-born Christians, conservative ones, here in the West, do not, or at least don't accept. And, sometimes we, on the far left, are asked, why don't you criticize Islam more? I can only really speak for myself when I say I've seen a lot of other leftists do a fantastic job. Like, just recently, Emma Thorne was accused of never criticizing Islam, which she herself pointed out is a very silly thing to say. You can easily find videos where she has a well-reasoned and not bigoted criticism of Islam. And I'm willing to admit that is not true of all atheists. That was actually part of why I moved somewhat away from YouTube atheism. I realized more and more, I'm not saying all, but a number of them were Islamophobes, and I can't support that. I never have and I never will. I guess it's a decent time to just briefly note, for those who don't know, when I was a child, my father taught Danish to Muslims. He was a teacher in a school where Muslim immigrants would come to learn Danish so they could better assimilate. And the Muslim students there of various ages were some of the nicest people I have ever met in my life. And I know some people would say, who doesn't treat children well? Well, entirely too high of a number of white native-born Danes. And at this point, I should underline, I don't hate my country. I take, there are aspects of Danish culture and history that I think are wonderful. You can watch my videos on the Valhalla movies, for example. I love Norse mythology. But I'm also frustrated by the racism and Islamophobia here in the West, including here in Denmark, and seek to criticize it. I suppose this is when we move on to the next phase, which is, as I record this, the most recent thing I heard about Donald Trump is a rumor that he has been taken to a hospital. And I say rumor because Republicans have for some years now, decades really, fought to make it more difficult to determine the truth when it makes them look bad, at least in their eyes. I've never really understood why you would want to obscure something like this. Like, it doesn't make you, like, obviously, you're not weak if Trump needs medical attention. He's like 80, I forget the exact number, and I'm afraid my wrists are too sore to look it up right now, but he's in his 80s. Of course, every so often, he might need medical attention. I'm considering post-dating this video, at least slightly, so I can't rule out that, I hope this video finds him alive and well. I do not wish harm upon him or anyone else. And frequent viewers of this channel know full well that I am not exactly a fan of him or his policies. I did consider holding off on this video until I was sure, but I am choosing this as the middle ground, and I want to underline, I'm not someone who thinks that these problems started with him. He is a symptom of a larger problem, and that problem might last past him. And that's why we non-violently, once again, boy, we far leftists have been called upon to say that we don't support violence a lot since Charlie Kirk was murdered, which, to be clear, I don't agree with those who outright celebrated, but I couldn't help but notice how many were claimed to be celebrating the murder of Charlie Kirk, which, has already been noted by others. I'm merely echoing their sentiments, though I'm doing so because I agree. It would appear that, at least in certain aspects, his killer was a conservative. I've seen Republicans really grasping at straws to try to make it seem that somehow it's the left's fault when we're not the ones with the violent rhetoric. We're not the ones who support, gun rights. We're in favor of gun control. I'm not glad Charlie Kirk is dead either. But no, I suppose I've made my point on that. Yeah. I would rather see Trump live a long time willfully engaging in restorative justice. I don't know that I particularly think it's very likely. But no, until things have gotten to a place where America cannot really be claimed any longer to be dictatorial, which is going to take a while. Republicans, once again, have been fighting to make it that for decades. I guess at this point it makes sense for me to briefly recommend, if you're not already watching, Legia Miller. Very well analyzed, well researched criticism of Reagan. Anyway, until America can in no way be described as dictatorial, we on the far left have to keep politically, non-violently fighting to achieve that end. And with that said, I do think I want to underline, yes, it is purposeful that I'm doing this video now, as we are indeed, yet again, as this movie depicts, we are seeing the struggle between a white Western, at least partially, I acknowledge that it is not fully, dictatorial regime in the West against Muslims in the Middle East. And in both cases, it is very clear that the idea of surrender is not really something that the Muslim world is particularly interested in. And I do think it is well worth noting that Iran did not start this. America, the American government and military did. For petty, selfish reasons, it has gone completely out of control, and it is abundantly clear that the Trump staff have no idea. They don't know enough to, if they knew even fairly basic facts about Iran, they would not have started this. I don't think it should be forgotten that this mess started when Trump tore up the Iran nuclear deal, which was very beneficial to America. It was a well-negotiated deal, but it had Obama's name on it, and Trump can't handle that. If there's something out there that doesn't have his name on it that people like, he becomes intensely jealous. And with that, I think we have reached the actual... Yes, so this... The basic story of this movie is a, historical account of Omar Mukhtar and he and his forces fighting against the fascist Italy. I want to start by noting, so apparently some have deemed this movie as hostile towards Italians. Now, I could not disagree more. If anything, I would say Italians are painted in a positive light. Fascism is what's criticized. There is, and this is not a spoiler because happens very early on. There is at least one Italian in this movie who goes against the fact, like he, no, yeah, it's really not a spoiler. If I gave details, it would be, but he takes issue with something that the fascists are engaging in, clearly motivated by his conscience. If anything, it's saying there were Italians rather back then, obviously. Given how long ago this is set, they are, if nothing else, they've died of old age by now. But there were Italians at the time who had such a strong sense of ethics that they refused orders given by the fascists, full well knowing the potential consequences. It is definitely a fiercely anti-fascist or Antifa movie. It is also an anti-war movie. And these are among the reasons that I love it. I think that brings us nicely to this has tremendous psychological accuracy, authenticity, and level of detail. You really understand every major character here, why they do what they do, why they perhaps go through changes over the course of it. No one is a cartoon character in either direction. No one is just, like, for sure, it is a movie that has tremendous respect for Umar Mukhtar, and because I've watched it, so do I. I guess this is decent enough time to briefly note. I should keep on track. I was just gonna contrast Muslims and conservative Christians here in the West once again, but I think I have made my point. I don't have a problem with Christians, but I have noted a tendency among white conservative Christians, especially in countries like America, but also some of the ones in England, for example, and here in Denmark, to simply not be motivated by trying to help other people. I'm not saying they never do good, but they are very eager to call for punishment for things that are not actually harmful and should not be considered wrong at all, rather than trying to help those in need. And that is strongly contrasted by the opposite that I've witnessed with my own eyes and seen evidence of in research when it comes to Muslims here in the West. I'm acknowledging that in the Middle East there are Muslims who support Sharia law, for example, and considering that some of these countries don't have democracy, I don't necessarily think that that's something, like, obviously I wish they didn't, and I hope that in the long term we are able to convince them otherwise, but you don't do that with military force. And I literally have not seen one single solitary thing that Middle Eastern Muslims, even that they're most extreme, even the extremists, even at their, that was not also argued in favor of, and sometimes carried out, even when it was against the law, by cishet white conservative men in America. And I'm not saying all cishet white conservative men, but once again, please look at the numbers, do research, and you will find there is a problem there. And it's a cultural one. It is not born, they are not born like that. Nobody is born like that. We all have the capacity for goodness. and most of us for empathy. And I am indeed one of the people who believe that one can do good even if one does not feel empathy, because one can come to understand good from a purely logical standpoint, simply looking at the fact that, well, it makes the world a better place. So even if you don't personally feel empathy, you can focus on that. But yeah, it is definitely a movie where we find ourselves reviling the antagonist characters, and they are fascists during, like under Mussolini. One of them literally is Mussolini, so I really don't think that that is saying that Italians in general are bad. And certainly the movie is not saying that Christians are. Similar to Mustafa Akkad's other directorial effort, The Message, about the origins of Islam. Both are very careful to not express hatred towards Christianity, and it is very evident to myself, at least, that they mean to. Like, it is not just calculated. Like, obviously, given that these were made in English, although I appreciate there is also a version of The Message that is... Um, I wish my wrist allowed looking this up, but I believe Arabic. Certainly in one of the Middle Eastern languages. But these were also, the English versions of these movies were intended for, worldwide distribution, not, not appealing purely to Muslims. Not that it would be a bad thing if they were. And it is worth noting that Islam does not, by its nature, have a, conflict with Christianity. This is explained very well in The Message, and it was something I knew of before watching that movie decades ago, the first time. Anyway, let's see. I think that does bring us nicely to... So yeah, the authenticity, very impressive. Like, I am in awe of how much, like, you really do get the sense of the war and this, or, well, see, that's the thing. In a way, let's say battles, because that's certainly accurate. I suppose calling it a war, there might be some issues with that. Certainly yeah, I don't know. I guess you could say it's a series of war crimes by the fascists, answered by, guerrilla methods by the Bedouins. But yeah, like, it has tanks and planes, concentration camps, yeah, the uniforms look exactly right. It's the body language. Like, I have seen some documentary footage. In fact, the movie splices in at least some, not distractingly so, that helps to demonstrate clearly, yeah, this is what it looked like. And yeah, they fit in so much detail, and the setup and payoff is really on point here. I was very impressed by, like, there are things where they'll just mention a thing and it might be a little while, but then it'll come back and it's like, oh, well, yeah, that is a solid payoff to that thing that I wasn't even sure at the time was set up. And the dialogue is also great. Like, you really get a sense of who people are based on the writing and delivery, which are both excellent, of the dialogue. The fascists, especially those with the most power, liken themselves to Roman, like Caesar is invoked by name, making it abundantly clear why they are doing this. And the Bedouins speak of justice, of not being colonized, of their families living safe and not facing the brutality of a fascist regime. The direction is quite strong. It never loses track of the story. Like the movie is about 2.5 hours, and I appreciate that it's one of those things. So the obvious caveat is, if you are not used to, epics of this size and scope and length from that time, then you might think it feels long. Like comparatively, by today's standards, maybe where, for example, the even longer, if I recall, Oppenheimer, it does not, because that one, the pacing is very different. And to be clear, I also love that movie. But yeah, by the standards of the time, it really does not drag at all. And the emotion is immense. It is a deeply engaging movie that makes you angry at fascism. And it is very careful to not lay the blame at any one person. I suppose an argument could be made, perhaps Mussolini. It certainly, you could read this as, Mussolini was where, like, he was the figurehead, and everything else came, the cruelty of fascists, of his fascism. To be clear, I acknowledge that all fascism is cruel by definition. I'm saying that it would feel silly to accuse Mussolini personally of being responsible for the cruelties of other fascist regimes. But his fascist regime's cruelty started with him, as argued by this movie and borne out by facts. But other than that, and I already mentioned there's at least one person who goes against it. Did I mention that that individual is in the military? So, food for thought. But it's not really saying that it's of a system that not only encourages but systematizes essentially sadism. And if you think that's an exaggeration, please open a history book and or watch this movie. And once again, like the message, there are bits where there are a lot of extras, and I will acknowledge that I've seen some say, I think that was specifically for the message, but some said that there were shots where they spotted extras that didn't seem, that seemed like they had either, let's see, that seemed to not know exactly what to do next or something like that. I've watched that movie so many times, I don't recall ever once noticing that. I don't know. Maybe it's in there and I'm just not quite seeing it. But yeah, in this and that, I would say that is a strong element. And yeah, it is filmed and edited impeccably. The the way that a scene will play out is very much based on what it is going for, and I appreciate that that was, more often true when this movie was made than, let's say 20 years later or so. But it really is very compelling. A scene that is meant to convey quiet emotion will be allowed to last longer. The ones of celebration have an energy to them, and there is a frank and unpleasant nature to the ones that depict unnecessary, harsh, even lethal treatment. And yeah, it is also that I wouldn't really say there's any fat on it. There's nothing here that you could really omit or even particularly trim down without losing something. Production value, set design, locations, costumes, and makeup are all great and help convey things about characters. Like, it feels big. It feels like it really is conveying, yeah, I'll keep it vague so as to not spoil, but this was a, the battles between the fascists and the Bedouins lasted years, which is also that's another thing where this, like, it can be difficult to convey that without ending up feeling long-winded. And yeah, it's genuinely really, really nicely done here. But you see such things as maybe where someone works, where they live, and how that is, like, there is a distinct difference between the office of a fascist in this and then, the workplace of one of the Bedouins. And yeah, costumes and makeup completely authentic. Like, I've already made my point on that, so I'm gonna move on. The sound design is also really powerful. There are these parts where you hear things that you cannot unhear. If you think there's a chance this movie is too graphic for you, then the answer is almost definitely yes. I feel like I've mostly covered characterization. I will merely say that I thought they did a good job of having a good amount of variety. I was never unclear on who was who or why they were doing what they were doing, things like this. Keeping in mind this is not one of those stories where we just sit down with every individual character and like, okay, so this person is called this, and this is their military title or their status within the Bedouin, a number of them you just deduce, oh, this must be, yeah, sure, because of the way they and others engage with each other, the interpersonal relationships. The acting is fantastic, and this really does have quite an impressive cast. Rod Steiger plays Mussolini to perfection. I have seen some footage of the actual man, like, it's uncanny. I mean, yeah, like, I suppose it's, of the ones I've seen, which is, I haven't seen that many, but of the ones I've seen, I would say I was most impressed by this and the one in Mussolini. Hold on, I have it right within Mussolini: The Untold Story. These were the most impressive depictions of, most authentic. And we have Oliver Reed playing Graziani, who is basically in charge of conquering Libya for the fascist regime. Irene Papas, there's not that many, cast members in common between this and The Message, but she is here and plays a very different role and nails it, which I quite appreciate when the same director has this kind of, because like you can watch these two movies and be like, this woman has range, like, wow. It's completely, like, if you only watch one of these movies, you might almost assume, is this just what she's like out of character as well? And then once you watch both, it's like, well, that's why they call it acting. Like, it really, absolutely amazing. And like that movie, there is an intensity and a presence to her. I have never been bored watching Irene Papas act. Not for a second. And then, of course, the other, at least major, I'm once again, I'm unfortunately unable to look this up right now, but certainly of the other that I specifically recognized, we have Anthony Quinn as Omar Mukhtar. And I don't have to tell you that he is amazing, because you already, I'm pretty sure babies come out of the womb. Like, for some, that might be their first words, Can we watch an Anthony Quinn movie? Because, like, it's just, it cannot be overstated. And this might be my favorite performance of his. It's some of them, it's been a little while since I last watched, but yeah, very, very impressive. And the characterization of Omar Mukhtar really underlines why he is thought of in such positive terms, because, like, obviously one thing is that he led, a number of Bedouins in resisting a fascist takeover of their country. They didn't enter fascist lands and try to take it from them. And this is said more than once in the movie. That's all they want. They just want the fascists to leave. If the fascists stop using violence against them and leave the country, there will no longer be a problem. And that's one of the things I think is important to really highlight in, dictatorships that try to conquer, I mean, really any war of, conquest. If you stop a lot of the time, I'm not saying always, but certainly if you didn't start a war, there's less likely to be, that the enemy will, like, I appreciate, like, okay, maybe you want to be ready to defend your own country, sure, but as soon as you enter someone else's country, that should be the last resort. Omar Mukhtar, who I will admit I do not know. I suppose I've already said, most of what I know about him is from this movie. But he is characterized as, first and foremost, just someone who loves other people. He loves his country and his people. The first time we see him, in the very opening of this, we are seeing him tend to the land. And it is immediately evident that, he is a senior citizen. He is, in advanced age. And then we have a montage, which is a very smart way to do this. Just, yeah, conveying, okay, so in between him just being, just, yeah, regular person, and then the events of the movie, it's the fascist Italy invaded. And they want to take the land from him and his people. Its people. And the next time we see him, he is not yet seen fighting, even though he, at this point, clearly has, like, it is not the first time that, because they mention that. They describe it in dialogue, which, once again, such a great way to handle it. The fascists are talking about having so much trouble with Omar Mukhtar. They don't seem to consider simply leaving, simply abandoning their grand project of recreating Rome. And then we see Omar, and he is teaching children. And he is very clearly one of those teachers that the students actually like. He does not come across at all as one who teaches, who tries to use fear and intimidation as a teaching method, which that was a problem, at that time across a number of cultures. He's seen to accept that his students, because there is a celebration nearby, and it is very difficult for these children to ignore how appealing that seems. And he accepts it and lets them go and doesn't make a big fuss, and then joins them there and clearly enjoys himself. So we get such a strong sense of him as just a human being. Like, it is tremendously humanizing. I would recommend, like, if you are currently struggling with Islamophobia, and I choose my words very carefully there, I do mean that you yourself consider that you wish you were not Islamophobic. You've gotten to the point where you're willing to admit to yourself that maybe you're Islamophobic and you would like not to be. Watch The Message and then watch this, because both of them show, which once again I knew from childhood, Muslims are just human beings. Like, I understand that there is so much Western media that tries to demonize them, and it's absurd because, once again, like, listen, if you meet them on friendly terms, obviously, yeah, if you are in a setting where there is not, like that, I'm willing to acknowledge part of it may be that they felt safe because my father in his classroom created an environment that, like, it was clear. Like, I doubt anyone's ever left one of, my father taught many different subjects across many different schools. I doubt anyone's ever left his classroom and felt like he was hostile or tried to scare people into learning. But I mean, that's true of many different people across many cultures, that when you feel safe, yeah, then you can, yeah, you can then either be nice or still be a jerk. And I don't know if I even have to spell it out, but I will. The I earlier in this video described when I was a child dealing with a bully who was also a child. We're both white. I was never Christian, much less conservative. But the social environment, was much more friendly to him than to me. He did not bully because he felt that he was not welcome in that classroom. He did it because he felt that it was friendlier to him than to me, that he knew he could get away with it. And I guess this is a good time to note, I have tremendous empathy for teachers, and in my experience, the vast majority of the time when they do something wrong, which of course, like, everybody does something wrong at some point or another, the important thing is what you do to make up for it, and try to learn from the mistake and not do it again if at all possible. But in my experience, most of the time when teachers do make a mistake, it's because of stress, and a lot of that could be alleviated by improving their conditions. Now, I think, yeah, I swear I'm almost done talking about Omar Mukhtar, but it is very, very clear he is beloved by the community, and he has earned that. It is not just because that's, again, some people seem to think that if one particular Muslim is well liked by other Muslims, that must mean some sort of like power hierarchy. And I'm not saying that's never the case, but once again, a lot of the time, like I would say personally, in my lifetime, in many, many varied ones, I have found that the percentage, when a Muslim is very popular with other Muslims, it tends to be because they are a good person, and a higher percentage of the time, at least. Not always, I'm not saying always. I'd like to think it's not even like necessarily the majority of the time, but a number of times I have witnessed with my own eyes that if a white conservative man here in Denmark is respected or like looked up to, maybe is a good, by others, by his peers, it is because he has power and is abusing it in some way. And I want to obviously underline, I'm not saying, like, we don't have as big problems as countries like America, where it's completely out of control with worshiping power. But we do have an issue, and I feel the best I can do to help improve things is to call attention to it, for example, in these videos. Now, the special effects are great, and it's one of those where they have the right amount. So there are squibs and there are gore effects, and at times it comes close, but in my opinion, it never crosses the line into being exploitation. There are several parts where they very carefully, they'll show something and then they'll cut away. It is a movie that really makes it clear how awful fascism was and is, but does not revel in it and does not try to pull its punches either, because, like, I mean, when this was made, fascism was less of a problem, and I don't know if it was meant as a warning for the future or merely, or not merely, primarily is what I meant to say, as, acknowledging that in the past it was really terrible. I do definitely believe that we should not forget the past. People who are ignorant of the past make the same mistakes as were made back then. Which is another reason why I take issue with conservatism, which seems to valorize the past rather than try to learn from it. I'm not saying we should forget it. It's so silly how they'll say, you tearing down statues, you just want to ignore the past. How are people going to learn? Okay, first of all, people learn from museums and textbooks, and the internet, when it's not overflowing with AI slop and other some such. But a statue is very specifically like saying this is someone that we should like honor, Anyway, so yeah, I guess that pretty much does bring us to the R rating. So yeah, the amount of blood and gore here. There is more than a number of other movies, including excellent movies that are anti-war and or anti-fascist. And if it were not justified, I appreciate, like, I for sure, I am not telling you that you have to watch this, especially if you do already appreciate how awful fascism is. Like, if you think that this would be too much for you, if you think it would give you nightmares, maybe even, like, maybe worse, I'm not telling you that you have to watch it. You know, there are other ways to appreciate the, you know, the themes and such. But both this and the message are, you know, grisly, but you know, they are also reflecting sad reality. You know, these things happened, and if we try to, like, make it seem as though, yeah. I realized just now that I forgot to mention, so I'm trying to always make a recommendation in these videos for a fellow leftist YouTuber's recent post, and this time I am recommending the Matriarchetype video. The video, I'm gonna briefly strain my wrists. So the video Alexis Blake didn't want you to see, and you may also want to watch Matriarchetype's follow-up about the copyright strike, which, yeah, I don't think I need to add anything to what Matriarchetype said in that follow-up video. I just want to make sure that other people note it as well, because it should not be ignored. You know, there are, you know, once again, you know, we have a person with power, Alexis, abusing that power. And yeah. So the, yeah, I think that does pretty much, yeah. Overall, I've really given it thought, and I don't think I can really place either this or the message above the other. They're both amazing. They accomplish slightly different things. I don't know. I mean, if you simply feel that you're not going to watch both, which, I mean, I appreciate, you know, capitalism grinds us down. You only have so much time, focus, and these are both long movies. I would say base your decision of which to watch on what you feel more like. You know, I think I've by now pretty well described this. You know, I guess, okay, just very briefly. So essentially, you know, a war movie, anti-war movie, and the message is a religious epic, you know. And yeah, I rate this 10 out of 10. And that brings us to the thoughts section. So once again, from here on out, I am spoiling everything about this movie, and I'm not necessarily going to go 100% in order. So yeah. I wanted to start by talking about the execution scene of Omar, because I really appreciated, you know, we once again have the recurring motif when he is about to read something, he puts on his glasses or asks someone else to help him with them, or that sort of thing. You know, and or I suppose, yeah, maybe someone else helps him with the glasses. And despite how important they are to him, you know, when this small child wants to play with them, he doesn't get mad. He just says, "Oh, be careful, I need those." But he puts them on, and he reads some, and then they hang him, and we don't get a close-up only wide shot of his body hanging there. We don't see his neck as it is. Because keep in mind, some of the other executions in this movie do show more. And it is like, it is not pretending that he was not executed, but it is focusing on the reaction to his execution, which, note, is not physically violent. It is emotionally intense. And, yeah. He goes out on his feet. He is not begging for mercy. He even says, do not tell anyone, and do not pretend in this room that I asked you for my life. And I think with that, I will try to keep this more or less chronological. So I already talked about the very opening. Yeah, so I really appreciate it. In the review, I talked about briefly the celebration, and I thought it worked really well, that it is, yeah, we don't spend very long in this celebration, but it is enough to make clear, hey, if no one's trying to kill them, they, yeah, some of the time they are teaching and learning, that is important for society to work. And other times they're just enjoying leisure time, And the filming and editing of the celebration is also like, it doesn't look scary. And I know that sounds silly to even say, but keep in mind, we have movies like The Siege, where Muslim, I guess it's a spoiler to get too into details, but there's an image in that movie that tries to make it seem off-putting when Muslims do a specific thing that is obviously not harmful. In fact, one could argue is a positive thing. And yeah, that movie was made for a Islamophobic audience, and I think it's worth noting it was pre 9/11. Even before 9/11, there was this fear-mongering and Islamophobia. It's completely ridiculous. I've done an entire video on that movie, so I'm not going to get more into it here. I do think it does some things very right. And yeah, I felt this did a really solid job capturing the angry outbursts that Mussolini has been documented as having, and it is chilling seeing so many fascist salutes. And yeah, it is worth remembering. I know every so often, when I encounter someone who did not know this, but yeah, Hitler didn't even come. For all the things Hitler, like, I try not to use the word lazy because it is a word frequently weaponized by rich capitalists to try to intimidate us worker class into, being afraid of being perceived as lazy, when really laziness very frequently, like if someone does not work, it can be things like disability, depression, lack of motivation, which, like, I don't blame anyone for not having the motivation to work under capitalism. Like, from its inception, capitalism has been completely merciless to those of us who are not rich, and extremely deferent to those who are, even if, there is no such thing as an ethical billionaire. You cannot become rich without doing something wrong or inheriting from someone who did. And I'm not saying it's impossible for a person who used to be wealthy to be good, but you can't hoard the wealth anymore. That's, not when people are dying because of lack of access to necessary funds. There is so much you can do if you are wealthy to make the world a better place. And such a massive number of the rich choose not to. And to be clear, I'm not, when you say rich people, by now, conservatives have worked hard to try to turn that into a dog whistle. I'm not talking about Jewish people. I'm not even talking about Zionists. I have no problem with, Judaism. I do take issue with Zionism, and I hope that one day the IDF will cease their genocide in Gaza of Palestinians. But rich people, when I say that, I mean that factually. I'm talking about everyone who has, significantly more money than they need. I appreciate, like, if you are not at that level, but you are like trying to save up because you're worried because, Republicans keep taking action that, and other conservatives in other countries, of course, keep taking actions that make it, you know, that mean that we have to worry about things that we shouldn't have to worry about. But once you have more than you need and more than makes sense to save up, if you are not spending money trying to make the world a better place for those who need the money now more than you do, that is what I take issue with. Now, let's see. I guess that does pretty much bring us to... Okay, I'm just gonna briefly make sure. Did I finish that thought? So I finished the one about the way the celebration was filmed. Yeah, I think I did finish making my point there. So yeah, we see the effects of the dehumanization that, the fascists did not see the Bedouins as equals. Plain and simple. That's the only way that you can engage in this sort of thing. And they raid the village, and they kill people. And yeah, they do say, oh, they have helped Omar Mukhtar. Yeah, to stop the invaders. Like, and that's, I love that is an actual line here. Like, of course we're gonna fight to stop the invading. Or wait, it might be the lawyer, but someone makes the point that it's, it's silly to make it a crime to fight back against oppressors, and I couldn't help but notice that those committing war crimes in this movie were fascists, not Bedouins. And I think let's see. So yeah, and once after the fascists, so the fascists kill this man, this father, and when Omar Mukhtar meets, or comes near this boy, he tries to do what he can to make sure the boy's taken care of. He tells the mother, try not to let him see you cry too much. He's not telling her. I think the wording is crucial. He's not saying, don't cry, because that's unhealthy. If you need to cry, you should. He's saying it's best if the kid doesn't see, because right now it's very important that he feels some sense of stability. And that's true. Like, he's essentially saying, the next time that you feel you simply can't help but cry, try to make sure, someone else is watching the boy so that he does not realize that that's what's happening. I make up a white lie, say you're going to the market or something, say you have to talk to one of your friends, something like that, And this is a decent time for me to note. I have seen... So for this, it's important for me to note. Here, I'm not talking so much about Danish white people. I'm more referring to white conservative men in countries like America. But I have noted a number of them will be much less willing to help take care of kids, even ones in the family. Some will literally kick their own child, their own flesh and blood, out of their home at an age where they cannot yet, work and live in a, if that kid turns out to be gay or trans. And by contrast, I have seen a number of Muslims be willing to take care of children who are not even remotely their own. Like when I was a child, was babysat by several, and one at a time, of my father's students. And they never complained. There was no sense of, like, I know that it's so ridiculous. It feels so wrong to even say it out loud, but there are white conservatives who will claim that if a Muslim is alone with a white child, then they will try to indoctrinate them. I have spent hours alone with Muslims who, like, they knew my father well enough to know that they're not going to be, like, punished. If, like, hypothetically, if I went to my father and said, so they tried to convert me into Islam, he wouldn't be mad. I think he might say, hey, that's a little bit outside of, boundaries. I don't even know that he would refuse to hire that one again to babysit. Just make sure that that's not, because, it was important to my parents that I did not grow up being pressured into a religion, which is why I am not religious. But they knew that about him, and frankly they knew about me that there's a really high percentage chance that if one of them had tried to convert me, successfully or otherwise, I might not have told my parents, even if it bothered me, which it probably wouldn't have. I've sometimes they have talked to me about Islam. They have never tried to convert me, not even once, no matter the circumstance. Like, I could tell that they were passionate about it, that they would like everyone to be Muslim, but they did not believe in forcing that upon anyone else. They would, explain why they love Islam, why it is important to them, and I would listen respectfully, and there was no conflict there whatsoever. There was never one of them who was frustrated that I was not becoming a Muslim, and I have made my point and I'm going to move on. I think that does bring us to... So yeah, I also just really love the way that this balances the catharsis of seeing effective guerrilla tactics be carried out with never glorifying... Like, it never feels like this is a movie that is not saying that you should wage war or use violence as anything other than the last resort. Like, it is merely saying, if you are invaded, you are allowed to try to stop those invaders. Like, note how they treat... Like, there is not one scene of Bedouins executing a prisoner. There is of fascists doing so. And that's where, that's one of the times where I'm afraid I forget his name, but the lieutenant takes issue. And then later, when he is called upon to execute a woman, or more than one, he refuses. And I don't think it should be forgotten, like, this was a time where, that sort of thing could get you executed. And in a way he is, but of course, because fascism is built on lies, they have to make it look like, oh, he was killed by the enemy, so that there is not word going around that, oh, they had to execute one of their own because he refused to carry out what they wanted him to do. And once again, it does not appear to even briefly lead to consideration by... They don't even stop to think, if even some of our own are refusing this, like, I'm sorry, how do you hear the words, I did not join the military to execute women, and not take a step back and say, we have to stop this. This is not okay. The answer is, of course, dehumanization. They dehumanized the Bedouins in their own eyes. They did not see them as, because this, like, listen, I get there are a number of people who would do this with a sufficiently disobedient animal. If you see certain human beings as animals, suddenly a lot of things seem within reason, even if ethically they are unacceptable. And it's worth noting that a number of the worst things that human beings have done to other human beings were done while there were others protesting it and saying this is wrong. Anyway, I think that does pretty much... Yeah. So before I talk more about the atrocities, I did want to go into, so yeah, that bit where they managed to, so you have the line, it's impossible to hide out there. And not long after, we see that they did indeed hide. And it's such a great misdirect and bit of setup and payoff. Because, like, yeah, as soon as you hear that, you're thinking, I don't know what else they're going to do, though. Like, if they don't hide, how could they possibly win in this circumstance? And as soon as you see, yeah, they were essentially partially buried in sand. Yeah, I mean, under those circumstances, you can indeed hide in the desert, like, of course. Because the thing was, when the line, it is impossible to hide out there, is of course referring to the fact that there's no, like, there's not, like, a mountain they can hide behind, for example. And as soon as you see it, you immediately understand both why the assertion was made and you accept, yeah, if it was wrong, because it's the kind of thing I've seen Hollywood screenwriters completely botch it and, just show something and we're sitting there like, but you just said that wouldn't work. Why is it now happening? This makes no sense, and it just takes you out of it. And yeah. And I really appreciated that this is one of those movies where, and I've seen it in a lot of anti-war movies. I've seen it less in movies that are about war, but not quite anti-war. But this acknowledges, yeah, some of the Bedouins did end up dying. It was not just like perfect, but they won a lot, and it wasn't Pyrrhic victories, And I guess that does bring us to the, so yeah. We have I don't think it makes sense to call it a battle. It's a slaughter. The tanks are deployed, and I really appreciate it. Omar Mukhtar makes it clear to his friend here, we can't win this. This is a battle that we're going to have to not fight. And that's crucial. In order to win, you have to pick your battles. And when it's clear that his friend is determined, Omar accepts it. He does not put up more of an argument. He doesn't say, oh, you fool, or something like that. He just accepts it because this is his decision. Omar has explained why he is not joining, and a lot of his men are not either. And that has also been accepted. The other one doesn't, like, accuse him of cowardice or something, because they know each other well enough that this is how it goes, And yeah, of course, it does not work. The tanks, both with their treads and their guns, very quickly. Yeah, and I don't think it is an accident that the movie does show, but not linger unnecessarily, in my opinion at least, on the carnage there, because, like, yeah, people are run over by these tanks. And I'm not one of those people who say that every movie should have a lot of violence. I think it should always be based on what is called for. And here, to me, that feels like what was done. Because yes, we see people run over. One of them is run over to the point where he dies immediately. There's, I think, at least two who are where it's like they're one or both legs run over, which might not kill. Like, it's possible they'll live at least some after that, depending on circumstance, And yeah, these are things that actually happened. Like, this has been documented. And that's one of the reasons why industrialism, among its many problems, what it did for warfare, I really don't think we should forget, because so many have died in such short time and so awfully. It should not be forgotten. I am, I suppose I've made it clear already, but I am against war as anything other than a last resort. And I especially think you should almost never start a war. It is a completely different matter if someone else starts a war and you are fighting back. I do not blame the Ukrainians, for example, not in the slightest. They are, like, I am impressed by the actions taken there to not, cross the line, and yeah. But I appreciate that war has been fought since, there has been conflict between different groups of human beings for as long as there has been different groups of human beings. But it used to be that far fewer would actually die in these. And then, there are a number of cases where they even ended up finding a way to coexist peacefully, And once industrialism delivered all these horrible, destructive, yeah, weapons and equipment, it has skyrocketed. Anyway, let's see, yeah, the concentration camps were also really, really harrowing. And the movie does not at all hide the rape, which, once again, you can look it up yourself. This is known to have taken place. And once again, like, the image of a child being torn out of its crying mother's arms so that the mother can be raped. That's an image that sticks with you, and that, again, is something that has happened, and we have to do what we can to make sure it never does again. And yeah, then, right, I forget, I think it's around here where it's, it is discovered that some of these helped, and so there's executions again, and I think that might be around the time, yeah, so we also have the attack on, yeah, and it's so clever because they really do get the time exactly right, because, like, we see, yeah, the fascists try to fight back, but they're not in uniform, like, they were asleep, and that's very effective way to get, like, sure, they're gonna do what they can to fight back, but they weren't exactly ready for it, and some of them might be still, like, just barely awake, which is a horrible situation to be wielding a dangerous weapon in. But yeah, all these little things, the wall, and then they, let's see, they get to the, yeah, they're able to take out the different, and that one person who manages to open the door right before, collapsing, and then they ride in, and yeah, just really, really, it is so satisfying seeing these fascists be, fought back so effectively. Inspiring, frankly. Once again, I'm not saying that we should engage in violence today. I'm saying back then, it simply could not have been done without that. And they get to the I would say armory is the right word, and they open, like, one box and, like, here, this is what we're here for, and then they close it, And we don't see immediately everything they got, and that makes it more surprising and more effective when we see it implemented. I just realized I completely forgot. So yeah, I mean, Omar Mukhtar literally does try to negotiate with them, and we have that point made, well, what is being offered is not going to be enough for Omar Mukhtar, and what Omar Mukhtar demands is not going to be granted. You're doing this to keep him busy, aren't you? And, Omar agrees in good faith. He really thought that they had that much decency and respect for their fellow men, but no. And so, tanks and planes in the desert. And I also really respect, once Omar realizes this, that's what's been going on here, he simply says, well, there's no reason to continue this then. He does not launch into like a flurry of insults. I also really appreciate the part where he said, so now you presume to interpret our religion for us, which again, like, that's immensely disrespectful to someone who has less power than you. I try my very best to only do so to those who have more, not less, power compared to myself. Now, I think that does pretty much right. And also, I'm not trying to say that they should like subjugate themselves and just accept, a dictator because of their religion. I try to say, if you're going to call yourself a Christian, you should try to follow what Jesus taught rather than just say, well, he suffered a lot and claim that you're being persecuted too. Like, to be clear, I'm not saying he did not suffer, but Christian conservatives today have a persecution complex. I've seen some say, it's not just, it didn't stop with Jesus. It's still happening, as if your problems at the hands of non-Christians are even remotely comparable. Like, listen, I agree. If you're an American conservative Christian, if you don't have a lot of money, you are struggling. If you say so. I know some of them don't like when we on the far left say that they have problems. If you think you have problems, yeah, most likely, I think there might be, I know some of them will claim that their problems are immigrants, and right now we are seeing what enough of that sentiment leads to with ICE. Yeah. I don't know if I even need to continue that sentence. Like, we are by now at a place where ICE are quite, yeah, quite unpopular, and it is well documented on the things they've done wrong, even as the Trump regime say to not believe your lying eyes. Now, the I do too many digressions. It's the unmedicated ADHD. Tried medication once, made things worse. Let's see. So I was talking about the yeah, I don't know. Maybe I did fully make my... Yeah, what I would say to conservative, white, cishet male Christians in America is you might be wrong about who is causing your problem. It's almost definitely capitalism, patriarchy, conservative Christianity. I'm not even saying that you can't live a happy life and be a Christian, but conservative Christianity, especially some of the branches in America, they're not trying to make sure you have a happy, healthy, long life. They just want to have power over you. And the sooner you realize that, the sooner you can start, once again, nonviolently resisting that. Because when enough of us demand equality, that's at least a step on the road to, which once again, I'm not saying that violence should ever be anything other than an absolute last resort. Now, I think that does bring us to the, let's see, yeah, so the bridge. The bridge might be, I mean, I think tactically speaking, it is probably the high point of the movie. Dramatically, perhaps there are other, but yeah, seeing, because there's the thing about like, why didn't he, destroy the bridge? And Graziani with this unbearable smugness. Like, I've seen Oliver Reed play much more appealing characters. This is not just like, this is how he is. No, this is what fascists are like. You don't have to take my word for it. Listen to, like, there are people online right now who self-identify as fascists. Look how smug and unbearable they are. They are so convinced of their own superiority. Like, I will acknowledge, like, I think in a lot of ways I am right about certain things. I try to be. I work hard to, you know, be as ethical as I can be, and I encourage others to do so as well. But sometimes I'm wrong, and I try to acknowledge my mistakes. I am not saying that I'm perfect. I'm not asking people to model themselves on me. I just want you to think about these things and listen to the far left, because what I've found is often the case is if you in good faith engage with far leftist content, there's a pretty decent chance you're going to end up agreeing with at least some of it. And yeah, but fascists a lot of the time refuse to admit fault. And he assumes, he's a natural warrior. I am an educated man, which that is also something I appreciate. Listen, I am not an anti-intellectual, but I am willing to acknowledge there are some people who are absolutely unbearable about their, education. And I also, I would argue the movie isn't anti-intellectual either. It is pro-empathy, and sometimes, some intellectuals, they think too much and feel too little, in the words of Chaplin. And I think that does pretty much cover. Let's see. There's at least one more thing that I really wanted to say before we get to the. I mean, there's certain obvious things I'm going to talk about the scene. I guess this is a good time to just briefly note, I really appreciate how well this does the tension and suspense, which I just realized I meant to say in the review itself. But here we are. Here it lands. I mean, frankly, downright Hitchcockian at times. Like, we have this thing of, like, it's mentioned he didn't blow up the bridge, and it's a sort of, I don't know, but this is why. It was a mistake by him. And then one of Mukhtar's own men said, maybe it was a mistake not to blow up the bridge, And then, we see the vehicles moving and like the way they are building anticipation, because genuinely we are sitting there, we're thinking, I mean, sometimes it does go wrong. I mean, for Mukhtar, it fairly rarely goes wrong, but, like the tanks were extremely effective that other time, but yeah, and we even have, we've got fascist soldiers checking the bridge, and they're like, oh, there's nothing here. It looks safe, And then we have, they appear above them, which is almost impossible. Like, what are you going to do? You can't fight gravity. All that they, as soon as some of these, pots are dropped onto, with a mixture inside, yeah, there's an explosion. And see, the thing about a tank is one of the main things, like there's a couple of major ways to render a tank significantly less, dangerous. One of them is, of course, to immobilize it, which might involve tank treads, such, maybe a proximity mine, I think is the right term. But another is if it is sufficiently hot. Like, it's one of those things where it can be difficult. Like, you don't want to use like small arms fire. Right, to be clear, I'm not speaking from experience. When I was younger, I studied a bunch of this stuff, to better understand how it is possible that so many have died in modern wars. But yeah, small arms fire, not really going to do anything. But if if there's intense enough heat, then it becomes an oven. And hypothetically, maybe you can try to climb out of the tank in time, And, the Bedouin, evidently, in this movie would not try to... again, I've made my case. I've made my point. In this movie, the Bedouin would not have continued attacking you. They would just have made sure that you surrender. But that still leaves the tank inoperable, if the people inside it are dead or have left it. And again, we have the detail that, one of them is indeed shot. And that particular pot does not quite land where they had hoped, because they were shot before they could drop it the way they meant to. And the artillery does also do, there are losses from the Bedouins because of the artillery cannons, It is a turning point. Like, Graziani really did do significant, he slowed down Omar with the trick of the negotiations in bad faith. And I don't know, I think it's noteworthy because, like, by then we're told, what was it, like, in 5 years they went through 5 governors, the fascists did. So clearly Omar and his forces put up a significant fight. Yeah, the way that the fascists, for all their military might, in order to win, they have to trick the guerrilla forces to stop fighting for a while. There's some chance that the fascists would never have been able to conquer if not for that trick. And yeah, I just think it's noteworthy that Omar never does such a thing. He never tries to trick. And he does not accept, there's the thing about, like, well, maybe you'll take a bribe. And he's like, you're doing this because you're afraid of martyring me. You just don't want me, you want to pay me that amount of money to stop doing something that, he even has the wonderful line, you think I have been so successful that I am worth that much money? Like, obviously pointing out, this is a bribe. You're not paying me to do something or even to really stop doing something. You're paying me to get me out of the way. It is less expensive for you to pay me to stop than it is for you to either keep fighting or just accept that you have lost, because in time they did lose. Like, Omar and it was great the way that, he says, I will live longer than my executioner. And that is repeated. That we hear that play again over, right as the movie's ending. And yeah, they, eventually the fascists did have to completely give up, Libya. And by then, a lot of people had died completely unnecessarily because it didn't end up changing hands permanently anyway, We really have to fight against colonization as much as, it is simply so deeply unethical. We cannot allow it to pass. Now, I think that does bring up the but yeah, so and right, there's they lure, they make it seem like, we didn't realize there were so many of them, we should retreat. And these fascists, these fools, fall for it because they assume that we're dealing with, these, like, they're not that smart. And that underestimation is why, it's a part of why they struggle so much against Omar, Yeah, they managed to follow them with vehicles a bit into the, and suddenly the horsemen stop. And then it's like, I don't think they're afraid of you anymore. Or if they necessarily ever were. And then we have the explosions. And it's so clever because, like, yeah, we didn't see, like, it. There are so many movies where they would have been like, we should probably see. I appreciate if the movie had been made 15 years prior, I think, then there would have been someone saying, we have to show it, otherwise people will be confused. And I appreciate that for a while people were, confused by you did have to spell things out. There are movies that were poorly received, and it seems to basically be, well, their cinematic language was a bit more daring than others, and that, yeah. But yeah. Of course, there were, they raided an armory. Of course, there were a bunch of explosives. That was supposed to be enough for that entire area. Like, I don't know exactly how many meters or kilometers rather that is, but yeah, and they're very carefully placed. And they managed to take out a bunch of tanks, which again, yeah, as just mentioned, that is one of the, like, tanks can be formidable, but an explosion that is significantly strong and close, yeah, that's it. There's nothing else to, I mean, I don't think it's accidental that, today, like, we see a lot more drones than tanks in many, many cases, at least. And then drones are obviously not invincible or anything, but one thing is that it is a much smaller target, and they can move much faster, more versatility. It's easier for a drone to avoid being shot down if they realize, oh, we're entering an area where they might be able to shoot us down. It can make a much faster retreat, for example. And we also have they also wield some of the fascists' own machine guns against them. And I think that pretty much covers the, let's see, right, I love the part where Mussolini literally says, I guess there should be 2 military reports for each action. One that says they're winning and one that tells me the truth that they're losing. Did it occur to you that maybe you did this, though? Like, maybe people are afraid to tell you the truth about your own work? Because, like, I'm a big believer in, if you have constructive criticism of someone more powerful than you, constructive, emphasis on that, you should not be afraid of sharing it. That should always be, like, I appreciate that there are situations where it needs to be shared confidentially. Like, there are certain secrets that you don't want out there. But a lot of bad things have happened because people were too scared to tell their supposed superior. Hierarchies of power are also something we should have minimal of. I'm not saying that there are zero situations where, like, I appreciate that certainly parents need to have some, it is impossible to raise a child without there being at least some power imbalance for at least some of those years. I'm a big believer in, once your offspring is an adult, like, let's see, I want to say, is it age 25 that our brains are fully developed? At that point, you should start treating your offspring as an equal. Anyway, yeah, I think that does pretty much cover the, yeah. And we have the thing about, the barbed wire. And it is specifically, one of them is like, that's a lot, though. Are we sure? And the criticism, the thing said is, how dare you? It's just like Hadrian's Wall. We are our ancestors. This is going to work because it worked for them. Did it occur to you that the fact that they did it might mean, like, okay, yeah, I'll acknowledge that there was definitely the Hadrian's Wall. Listen, I've read enough history. It was effective. But you want to take that kind of lesson from the past? Like, you want to do something bad because it was done before, and back then, at least for a while, the people who did it got away with it? Like, that's such a harmful idea. And once again, it is prevalent in ideologies like fascism. Yeah, I suppose that does more or less cover. I really appreciated see, that's another reason why I say this movie is not against Italians. Look at that defense attorney. he shows respect to Omar Mukhtar, and like his defense is very clearly like he's not just like, okay, I guess I have to. I don't know. It's, I mean, I don't know that he's expecting that they'll listen, that it'll be a fair trial, but he does what he can, and he makes really solid arguments. And yeah, pointing out, right? I also, the smugness of the prosecutor, being like, oh, you're so old. Just like, yeah. And yeah, he's basically saying, so you did the things you're accused of, right? And Omar doesn't even, like, he's not trying to, like, deny that. He's just saying, yeah, but it was just. Like, what do you mean? Like, why would I not do this? And the defense attorney, I mean, listen, if I wasn't already on Omar Mukhtar's side, I would probably have turned just from that defense. He points out, he asks, have you ever submitted to, do you consider yourself under the authority of Italy? Do you think of yourself as, because under those circumstances, yeah, he's fighting his own government, obviously, but he never has said that, not even in his, like, there were times where he was worried that they might not be able to win, but he never surrendered. And yeah, just and then I think that pretty much covers everything. Just I want to briefly note, I really appreciated how sometimes with stories like this you end up where the women within it, the female characters, are kind of presented as if, like there's maybe some biological essentialism, gender essentialism going on, and yeah, like here, like it didn't feel like, because once again, it's not just, oh, women, women just cry and men do. Like, we see men make mistakes. We see men deeply emotional over losing family members, and the women do what they can to help Omar. So yeah, yeah. I really appreciated that. That is, yeah. I'm just real quick going to mentally fast forward through the entire movie to see if there's anything else I wanted to say. Yeah, there at the end we get, we briefly get the mention of the fate of Graziani, and I appreciate that there's not even text spelling out, I mean, hopefully no one watches this entire movie and are like, well, what happened to Libya though? Because like, hopefully that long by, I mean, the movie's from 1980. It was, yeah, all the colonies, although countries like France were a little slow but the colonies were given back, other than America itself. And that's, of course, also how the state of Israel, which, listen, I'm not saying that Jewish people should not have a country. I'm saying I don't want them to, I don't want their government, once again, I'm not talking about all Jewish people. I'm talking about Zionists and the IDF, the Israeli government. They are who are, the last two are guilty, and the Zionists are supporting it. And it's important to note, there are ex-Zionists in the world. There are people who were raised to be Zionist, and then they learned enough information, and they left that behind. And some of them are actually trying to, help explain, that, okay, so this is what they taught us. This is why I was a Zionist. Like, I've heard, I'm afraid I forget who, but I heard one note that, well, I mean, he was taught that Israel was just empty desert when the Jewish people came in. And like, okay, yeah, if you're taught that, of course you're going to believe that it is the Israelis living there that have the right. Because under that, if you believe that, then logically it follows then I guess, does that make the Palestinians immigrants? And then it's like, well, I mean, there's a lot of native borns all around the world. not all of them even racists, who would say, well, I mean, immigrants can't just come and take over our land. They can't make demands like that. It's fine for us to live in peace and harmony. And a lot of people, a lot of Zionists believe that that is what the Israeli government is trying to accomplish. And when you look at what they're doing, which once again has been very well documented by now, clearly they are not trying to do that. Countless Palestinians do want to just live in peace. There wouldn't be this problem if the IDF were not carrying out a genocide, and all the abuses that they also carry out. It's which once again, I'm not saying Jewish people. The problem is the Zionists tend to dehumanize Palestinians and Muslims in general, really, and I guess I've made pretty clear by now that is something I take great issue with. Yeah, I think that might cover. I mean, I appreciated, Omar Mukhtar does, clearly make a mistake. He shouldn't have agreed to the negotiations. And I appreciate, from what I understand, that is historically accurate also. But yeah, I mean, you could have made hypothetically, if you wanted to just say, oh, Omar Mukhtar never made a mistake in his life. Well, I mean, hypothetically, maybe you could have, based on a true story, yeah, until you thought it wasn't completely, as dramatic as if you changed it. I'm not saying that's a problem. I'm just saying don't treat based on a true story as documentary. But hypothetically, you could have written it to where, oh, Omar didn't participate in those. He didn't even know they were going on. The others did it on his behalf. And then, this bad stuff happened. No. He made a mistake. And I think it's worth noting that the mistake he made was to trust fascists. He took them at their word. He thought that they were honorable people, at least to that extent, that they would not lie about negotiations. And, that is like, there's a saying that might makes right. And I think it's worth noting that different people use it in different ways, because some people take it as meaning, and I'm not going to discuss what it originally meant. I'm just noting some take it to mean that if you have enough power, what you do is justified. That definition of right. Others interpret it as if you have enough power, you can get away with almost anything. And, one interpretation of that is that that's not okay. That's not ethical. That is just, it's a neutral statement. It's factually accurate that there are, if you have enough power, you can get away with at least a lot for at least a long time. But that doesn't make it just. And yeah, like here we see, they tried to do that, and they got away with it for a while, and they did manage to execute Omar Mukhtar, but that doesn't make it just. Like, I think it's very noteworthy that there at the end, we see, it's clear that he died, but I already talked about at the start of the thought section, it's clearly not like reveling in the fact that he was executed. It's focusing on how upsetting it is to all those who loved him. And then it's just dryly noted, 1955, they executed Graziani for his war crimes, That was not that long of a victory. And, obviously today, sadly, fascism and other dictatorial ideologies are, they still have a lot of power in various parts of the world, but the movie makes it clear we can fight. Like, Omar Maktub, like, if you don't, like, Omar Maktub, if you in this movie, if he is not forced to fight, he would rather tend to the soil. Is that the right term? Tend to the land, at least, and teach children the Quran. Teach them to be good Muslims. And I think both this and The Message make really strong cases for Islam being an incredibly empathetic religion, which, once again, in my personal experience, that is how it is practiced by many, here in the West, immigrants from the Middle East. And a lot of the time when I see cishet white Christians, conservative Christians, they claim empathy. At this point, some of them say that that's actually wrong, when it's like, okay, can you just stop calling yourself a Christian then? Because, like, literally, Jesus preached empathy. Like, that's not an exaggeration. That is what he did. Look at his words. He was in favor of empathy and against the rich. Like, I should not have to explain your own faith to you. If you're not going to follow that part of Jesus's teachings, I would argue the most important, stop calling yourself a Christian. Just stop. It's honestly pathetic. You are an immature, you just want to be able to get away with things. You just want to feel part of something. You're not a Christian. I'm not no true Scotsman in this. I'm saying if you're not going to follow something that, like, you can still, listen, Christians, like everybody else, can make mistakes. I'm not saying that you're ever going to be perfect just by being Christian, just by being far left. Nothing will make you perfect. Perfection is something we strive towards. It's the goal. We're never quite going to reach it. But if you're not even going to follow something that, like, I mean, at that point, what do you even have left? Just the Old Testament, which I appreciate. There are some things about, and once again, I don't hate Jewish people, for example, but yeah. To return to the other point I was making, conservative Christians will claim to be good and then, not do good. They will fight against people who are not inherently their enemy. Like, if you can't live side by side with someone who believes, like, keep in mind that many Muslims consider their God to be the same as the one in the Bible and the one in the Old Testament. They have their interpretation differs somewhat, but, like, under a lot of circumstances, Muslims are open to Christians, and, like, I don't think there's any Muslim I've ever met who didn't realize at some point or another that I was an atheist. They didn't treat me any different after that. Some of them were surprised by it, but no one, yeah. I think that does pretty much cover. So yeah, last thing we see Graziani do is have the execution carried out of Omar Mukhtar after he even notes that this will probably martyr him. Like, he's essentially saying, this is probably a mistake, but I'm still going to do it, because he's so sure that he's right. And the last few things we see Omar Mukhtar do, I hope I'm pronouncing his name right. Please forgive me if not. The very last thing I've already talked about. He's trying to read the Quran, and then he is hanged to death. He accepts it, and he even, he says, nothing will happen that God does not will, and he is okay with dying as long as, like, the one thing he says is, do not tell anyone that I begged for my life. I mean, he doesn't even use the word beg. He says asked. And I also think that both of these movies really help destigmatize Islam, because like you watch them and it's like, I mean, these are just human beings who are trying to do good, trying to live normal, healthy, happy lives. And yeah, their faith is Islam, not Christian or Jewish or any other. They're still, they're trying to be ethical people, and it is very evidently motivated by Islam. And I swear it's the last time I'll say it in this video, but in my experience, a higher percentage of Muslims, including conservative ones, are motivated by their religion to do good compared to white Christians, perhaps especially men here in the West. I have to be careful about. See, the thing is, the words male and female are supposed to just be neutral descriptors, but a bunch of misogynists have started using it to, now it's like gender essentialist, or they're trying to imply that women have an unchanging nature, and it's just absolutely ridiculous. Like, you genuinely must not have met very many women if you think that any one woman cannot change or will not change. I would say I've met more women who were willing to change when they saw that something, and I'm not saying that I like convinced them to, I mean other women showed them, oh hey, this is actually a better way. But yeah, higher percentage of the women I've met than the men I've met have been willing to listen to. Like, a lot of the time when a woman meets a woman who is better than her in some way, she's like, maybe she can teach me, and a lot of the time they do. And a lot of men, when they meet a man who is at least perceived to be superior, they instead decide, oh, I must tear them down so that I can feel better about myself. But the second to last thing that we see Omar Maktoum do is ask for some water so that he may pray. He knows that nothing he does is going to prevent his execution. If he were so inclined, he could launch a barrage of insults. He could, I mean, he wouldn't get far, but he could try to physically assault a guard or something, just like, yeah. But he just wants to pray. And for that, he will, that is part of their custom, their ritual for praying is, to use a bit of water to, clean themselves before God. And I just think that's worth noting. Contrasting the last actions that we see on screen of the fascist, followed by the text saying, yeah, he was executed too. I mean, I would argue Omar Maktoum should be remembered more positively than Graziani. Contrasting that with the last actions of the leader of this Muslim force who were just trying to prevent their land from being taken over by fascists who were raping, murdering, putting innocent people in concentration camps, running over defenseless people with tanks. I think the movie makes communicates what it sets out to very effectively. And yeah, I mean, I must by now have watched it half a dozen times. Sometimes there is a while, like maybe a year or more between two viewings. And that is not because I don't want to watch it again. It's because it hits so hard. It really gets to you, watching these monstrous things done. Seeing the inhumanity that sometimes man is capable of against other human beings. And then seeing this spirit of resisting that, of fighting until you can't anymore, and then gracefully accepting that this is it. Because like, I don't blame anyone who can't go out in a, you know, in a way similar to Omar, the kind of calm, you know. But if you are at all capable, if you know that people who love you are going to see you either as or right or soon after you've died, you know, yeah, okay, I'm gonna go ahead and spell out. So I am not saying that I don't blame those who do end up committing suicide, for example, or get into a circumstance that is equivalent. What I will say is try to remember there are people who care about you, who don't want you to die. And, you know, sometimes you just need to talk to someone. And, you know, a lot of parts of the world, you are able to find someone, perhaps even local, who can and will talk to you and try to help you, you know. And yeah, I think that is everything for this one. Just yeah, I I'm really really glad that Mustafa Akkad was able to make these two movies. It's yeah, and I mean, it would make my day if someone has watched this video and decided that they're going to go watch it, or The Message, or both. So if that is you, please drop a comment down below. And yeah, never stop nonviolently fighting for what is right, your country, your people, your faith, you know. Always resist dictators, and yeah, stay true to your values, particularly if they are, you know, I mean, try to make your values as ethical as possible, and then stay true to them until such a time as you perhaps realize, oh, that wasn't actually the ideal, and then try not to be too hard on yourself. You didn't know, you know, absorb the new knowledge, and yeah. Can you tell I love these two movies?